Hello everybody, we're going to be getting started on another math video. This one is going to be covering solving equations using the distributive property. We're going to start the video with a quick review of what the distributive property is. We're going to then showcase how we can use that with solving equations. But one quick reminder, whenever we're solving equations, we're really looking to find what the variable is equal to. Something like 1x equals 3 is the answer we'd be looking for. However, when we're using the distributive property, we're simplifying an expression into something else, but that usually hasn't had a solving equations with it too. So this skill is really just taking two things you've already learned and combining them together. So let's get started. On this first problem, we are just reviewing what the distributive property is. And there are two ways to think of this problem. The first one is that this is a problem with something like algebra tiles. So I pulled them off here onto the left. And so what I have is I have inside my parentheses, I have 3 individual x's and then 1 negative chip. And what I would do here is I would do this twice. So I'm going to take the term that I have inside the parenthesis and I am going to copy it to make it happen a second time. And so what I would have at the end of this process is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 x's, and then 1, 2 negative chips. The shortcut would be if I would take the number 2 times every number inside the parentheses. 2 times 3x would be 6x, and 2 times negative 1 would be negative 2. If we were doing this with negative chips, we would have something that is pretty similar. When we are distributing a negative 2 on the inside, everything that we did at the beginning is going to stay the same. We're going to put 3 x's next to 1 negative chip. And because we're doing the distributive property twice, we are going to copy everything one time. Now the problem is we're not actually doing it twice. We're doing it negative twice. And what that actually means in this problem is we're going to make everything that we just did opposite. So I'm going to take these and slide them over. And I'm just going to make every term we just made opposite. So I have my 3 x's on top, my now 1 positive chip, and I'm going to copy all of that and drag it down, which means for this problem we would actually get negative 6x plus 2. Now, because that's a little messy, most of the time people are going to use the shortcut at this point. But be really careful with those negatives. Negative 2 times positive 3x would give us negative 6x. And negative 2 times negative 1 would give us positive 2. Which does give us the same answer that we were getting before, but it is a little bit quicker to be able to use the shortcut instead of the actual problem. Now, the reality, though, is when we're actually solving these problems with the distributive property, once we get to that point, nothing is actually different than what we've been doing on the rest of our problems. We're always going to draw a line down our equal sign to split our problem in half. And here I have negative 2 times 3x, which is negative 6x, just like we had before. Negative 2 times negative 1 would give us positive 2. And then we'd have our negative 10 on the left. Now, this is exactly like what we did in two-step equations. We find the number that is farthest away from x, which in this case is positive 2. We ask ourselves, what's the opposite of positive 2, which is negative 2. So we get negative 6x left on the left side. And on the right side, we get negative 12. Be very careful with those negatives. If you thought negative 8, that means you went back to the right on the number line instead of staying left. Then from here, we divide both sides by negative 6. Be very careful with this negative because we want 1x is equal to 2. And we're done. So to recap, we do the distributive property like we learned in our previous unit. And once we have the distributive property done, now this is exactly the same as what we've been solving before. Let's see if we can do 2 more examples here before we run out of time. I think we've already done this problem, so we're going to go down to the next one here, which is 5 equals 5 parentheses 3y minus 8. At this point, the first thing we want to do is draw that line down our equal sign to remember that there are 2 sides of our equation. And then this video has shown us our next step should be the distributive property. We're going to multiply every term inside the parentheses by 5. So I'm going to keep this 5 on the left side here. I'm going to do is equal to 15y, because 5 times 3 is 15. And then 5 times negative 8 will give me negative 40. From here, it's now just a 2-step equation. I'm going to add 40 to both sides. This is equal to 0, so we can ignore it. And we get 45 is equal to 15y. We need to split this into 15 equal groups by dividing both sides by 15. And we get 1y is equal to 3. And that would be the end of our problem. Now we can check our answer by if we take the number 3 and we insert it right there. 3 times 3 is 9. So I would do 5 and then 9 minus 8 inside the parentheses to see if our left side of our equation still equals 5. Well, this right here is 1. And 5 times 1 is equal to 5, which means we must be correct because our equation is true. Let's try one more problem and see how comfortable you're feeling with this skill. So on this one, I wanted to add a bunch of negatives in just to show you that even with the negatives, the process is not any different than what we've been doing before. This case, we're going to be distributing a negative 2 into every term. So be careful with your negatives here. The most common mistake is missing one of those. Negative 2 times positive 6e would be negative 12e. Negative 2 times negative 9, be careful in there, would give us positive 18. Once we've done the distributive property, everything else is just like we did in the last section. We find the variable, and we do the thing that is farthest away from it, which is positive 18, and the opposite of positive 18 is negative 18. Because that's equal to 0, it can be ignored. Be careful with your negatives here because negative 6 and negative 18 combine to be negative 24. And then we have negative 12e is all that's left on this side. And then from here, we can divide everything by negative 12. Be careful with your negatives. And we will get e is equal to positive 2, which will be the end of our problem. As a quick review, when we're solving equations with the distributive property, the first step is to get rid of the parentheses by doing the distributive property. Once we've done that, we then just have a regular 2-step equation like we've been solving before. You can check your answer by substituting your value 2 back into your equation and and seeing if it makes a true statement. But as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.